Hello, Professor Fordham. Thank you for joining me today on
Sabbatical, Spotlight Series, Sabbatical, Spotlight Series, Sabbatical, Spotlight Series, Sabbatical, Spotlight Series.
Sabbatical Spotlights. Professor Fordham is an associate professor in the English department. Her focus is creative nonfiction writing, and she runs the Roadrunner Review, an online literary journal produced by students at La Sierra University. She spent her fall sabbatical writing 2 literary essays on the subject of motherhood. Tell me a little bit about your sabbatical.
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. And I was so appreciative of getting a sabbatical fall quarter. I have been working on a book-length manuscript since I arrived at La Sierra, and that's what my previous sabbaticals were mostly doing. And so that is going through the publication process right now. And so I was so excited to shift my focus over to a topic that's very relevant to me at the moment, which is motherhood. So in my proposal, I wrote that I would do 2 literary essays. The topics for one of them changed, as happens when you're writing. It's always, students know this as well, it's hard to exactly do the thing that you initially said. One of the topics stayed the same. I wrote about waiting. And the other, it was kind of a meditation on the word waiting. When my child was very young, she was a terrible sleeper. And so I spent a lot of time waiting for her to go to sleep. And I would see in my head all the student emails I wanted to write back. And I was holding her in my arms and like rocking her. And so I started writing this essay in my head 6 years ago when I was waiting for her to go to sleep. I was thinking of all the times in my life I've waited and how those times of waiting resolve themselves. And so my plan was to write an essay with vignettes and to have each vignette be about a time of waiting and to end the essay when my daughter finally goes to sleep. So that was the intention. But as I started writing, I got really interested in the big kind of waiting question for me, which is that I'm an older parent. I had my daughter when I was 39 years old, and I've been reading a lot of articles, a lot of hand-wringing that people do, politicians, health officials, about older mothers. So there's lots of articles in the New York Times, Washington Post. What does it mean that we have this rise in older mothers? And I thought, you know who you never hear from? You never hear from the older mothers. So what the piece ended up being is I started in the same place trying to get my daughter to go to sleep. And I spent the essay kind of looking at different times I was waiting while tracking the reasons I was an older mother. And I went back and forth between my experiences and the articles I had read. The other piece I wrote was also about motherhood, and also I think particular to me in that I think that this is a question a lot of parents might have, which is raising a very young child in a planet that has a lot of environmental catastrophe. There's all the climatologists are creating these really dire pictures of what the next 20 years is going to look like, what the next 30 years is going to look like. And as a parent, you want everything wonderful for your child. You make all these plans. If you're a typical middle-class parent, you start saving for a college fund. And so you do all these very kind of particular things thinking about your kid's future. And then on another parallel, I'm thinking about climate change and how that's going to affect her future. And so I wrote an essay about kind of the fears that parents have around climate change and the fears my daughter has about wolves. She's I tell her there's no wolves in California. She has a lot of fears around wolves. And so I kind of looked at the 2 things, real fears that we have and unrealistic fears that we have, things that we are afraid of that we don't need to be afraid of. And so those 2 aspects I kind of played in tension with each other throughout the piece as I built up to this idea of, is climate change a real fear, or is this an imaginary fear that we're having? And if it is a real fear, what does one do as a parent with this information?
What is the current status of your research?
The current status is I finished both pieces in Sabbatical. I finished my piece about climate change. It's titled The Mountain Lions of Watamu. Watamu is a town in Kenya by the coast. And obviously, if you're listening to this, I hope the thing you're thinking of is there's no mountain lions in Watamu. It's addressed in the essay. So that piece I finished about halfway through my sabbatical. And the mountain lions of Watamu got picked up in 7 days, which has never happened to me before. So I guess that would be a big surprise. Climate change is a big topic right now. And so I think that the topic of parenting and climate change resonated with their reading staff. So that got picked up really fast. Waiting, I think, got picked up in about 2 months, which is good, 2 months. And it was published on Booth. And Chattahoochee Review is a very established, well-known literary journal. I was thrilled to be in it. But in some ways, Booth made me more excited because it's a student-run literary journal. It's run by the MFA graduate students of Butler. And so what they do is they have a class, not unlike literary editing and publishing, which I teach. And the class of students reads their submissions, and then they have a big meal, and they decide what's going to go into their literary journal. And so I was really excited to be in a student-run literary journal because the Roadrunner Review is here at La Sierra University. It's run by our undergraduate students. And I really wanted to know what Booth's process was like in comparison to the Roadrunner Review process. So I was also doing a little research on that.
Well, thank you so much for your time. And we will see you all next time on
Sabbatical, Spotlight Series, Sabbatical, Spotlight Series, Sabbatical, Spotlight Series, Sabbatical, Spotlight Series.
Sabbatical Spotlights.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.